Welcome to Sustainably Wed's Head Table series, where we take deep dive conversations with people from outside of the wedding industry who are experts in their fields and bring that information back into the industry to see how we can make events more sustainable. So events have both a direct and indirect impact on our oceans, waterways, and marine ecosystems. And living on an island, as we do here, those impacts can be hard to ignore. And while people from all around the world come here to get married and celebrate because of the natural beauty of the island, those same celebrations and events can put those ecosystems at risk. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the impacts of the event industry on our oceans, and we'll examine what we can do as individuals and as wedding vendors in order to create ocean-safe events, or maybe even leave our oceans better than before. Hopefully, that's the goal. So before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and the Wasanich nations. We're also lucky to be filming here at the Beach House today, which is a fantastic wedding venue. You can't see that we're right on the ocean because we have this set, but I can see the ocean and it's really beautiful. So we're really, really lucky to be here. Speaking of being lucky, we're also really lucky to have such wonderful people here chatting with us today. I'm going to start with Stephanie Chong works at the Maritime Museum of BC as the School and Public Programs Manager. She's worked in education at museums and science centers in Victoria, Vancouver, United States. Anywhere you haven't worked.
Australia.
She has not worked in Australia, but everywhere else. She's got a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Geography and a Master's of Museum Education. And I really liked this bit from her bio. She says that in her spare time, you'll likely find her wandering around the intertidal zone looking for wiggly creatures. And I think that's just a really great way to spend your time. Thanks so much for being here, Steph.
No worries.
To my left here, we've got Lucas Harris, who's the Executive Director of Surfrider Canada, which I'm not going to tell you any more about because I'm going to ask him about that in a couple of minutes, but they're a really awesome organization. He's been involved with that organization since 2007 in a wide variety of roles, starting from being a volunteer there, and was also, I'm going to read this so I get the ministry name right, a regulator for the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. Where he spent about a decade working on some really awesome plastic pollution policies. And has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Environmental Studies and Political Science and a Master's of Science in Geography. You just have all the qualifications. That was a very long intro. But thanks so much for being here, Lucas.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And last but definitely not least, we have Chris Ann, or Charlie Lake, who's an awesome wedding officiant with a group called Young, Hip, and Married. We're getting a real double whammy with Charlie here today because she also has a wide range of experience in humanitarian organizations and environmental NGOs, including Habitat for Humanity and Surfrider, which is an awesome combination that these two know each other, and also works with the University of Victoria. And that's it. Let's start the episode. So here on Vancouver Island, we're super lucky to be surrounded by really unique and dynamic marine ecosystems, which we can see a little bit of out the window there. I mean, we can't really see it too much, but it's under the water, I'm sure. So Steph, as someone who works in public education, educating the public about our oceans, I wonder if you can tell me first, what makes you excited about that biodiversity in the oceans? But on the flip side of that, what makes you worried about our ocean health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm actually not from Victoria. I'm actually from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, in English, Vancouver. And I think I always kind of took for granted that Victoria was very similar to Vancouver, and I got over here and I went down to the beaches and I realized it's not the same. Not that anyone would notice this, but the barnacle species are different here. The gumboot chitons, which I've never seen, I've seen one dead one in Vancouver, never seen them, I've seen them in Victoria. It is absolutely wild how close everything is. I live a 15-minute walk from the water on both sides, going north and south. So that makes me really excited just to have the joy to find new things and to have discovery. And I think that is what drives me to learn more about the ocean, is that there's so much that I don't know about, and I'm such a curious individual, and I love to learn, and I love to be with nerdy people. So I think it's just I think a love of wanting to learn more, and I think a love of wanting to understand, I guess, my place in the world. And I think that kind of ties into a little bit about what makes me concerned, is that a lot of times we think of ourselves as one, as an individual, and we forget that it's not just us, it's all of the things that we do are within the context of where we live and who we're around. It's, me, my partner, my sister, my family, my friends, and all of these people that I don't know, but all the people that came before me, and all the people that, hopefully I'll leave this place and there'll be a home for them as well. And so I think that kind of worries me a little bit, is that we often think about ourselves and not the big picture. And that's what I would really hope for the future, is for people to think about everything and to continue to have that like really unbridled joy for the outdoors and for biodiversity.
Totally. I think, especially here on the island, sometimes we take for granted what's just outside of our doorstep. And so that's my great segue into the awesome organization of Surfrider, and the awareness that you bring to people to step outside their door and see what's out there and do something good about it. So I wonder, Lucas, if you can tell us a little bit about Surfrider, and what you do and why that work is necessary, both here on Vancouver Island, but also across Canada.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Surfrider, I think, is really well known for being one of the leading grassroots organizations around the world. It really gives people in communities a platform for getting involved with issues that they care about. We are really driven by the people and the communities that we are part of. So, for instance, here on Vancouver Island, there's several community chapters and school clubs that are a collective of people who care about whether it's plastic pollution or climate change, water quality, and then they take it upon themselves to work together to figure out programs that can engage people in the community to participate in restoring ecosystems or monitoring water quality, preserving public beach access. And so they get together and they'll, find ways to elevate that. Or if there's issues, they'll find campaigns, opportunities to advocate for solutions. So it's really about a community-driven sort of initiative for people.
Yeah. How do you feel that kind of bringing people together? I know sometimes it can feel a little bit isolating to think about all of the problems in the world and how few solutions we have for them. Do you find that community of people and bringing people together kind of makes that easier for people to think about and tackle those issues?
Oh, for sure. And I think that's what really makes Surfrider unique, is that in our DNA, we provide people like a clear pathway from actually seeing an issue that seems complex and systematic, but allows them ways of getting involved at the ground level. Right. So I'll give you an example, like plastic pollution. People learn about its impact to the ocean environment, and they want to do something about it. So we, for instance, host beach cleanups where they can come, use their hands, and actually make a difference, right? And it brings them into the organization and then opens up a whole other wide array of opportunities for them to, take their passion and apply it in different ways. Maybe it's advocating for a local ban on single-use plastics in their community, or at a provincial or federal level. And so it's kind of like a funnel, if you will, where people can, take their enthusiasm and apply it in different ways. So they feel empowered, right? It gives them the autonomy to do something at the same time. So we're able to decode often those sort of challenging feelings that people have where they feel overwhelmed, and give them concrete opportunities to get involved.
Amazing. Well, speaking of that, the beach cleanups, when you're doing those, say here on Vancouver Island on a local scale, what kinds of things are you seeing come up? What are the plastics that people are finding, on our coastlines and in the ocean?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the use of language is really key there. So when I think of local, I think about communities where there's settled people, there's dwellings, commerce, et cetera, like here, right? Southern Vancouver Island, there's a lot of communities. In these type of places, we find a lot of single-use plastics, containers, food wrappers, cigarette butts, those type of materials. But if we were to sort of zoom out a little bit and maybe take it away from that local and go to more of remote environments which Vancouver Island and the rest of the British Columbia coast is well known for, we start to see the profile of plastic pollution change dramatically, where we'll find a lot more commercial materials, things that are commonly used in like the aquaculture and commercial fishing industry, or other sort of aquatic infrastructure like, foam that's used to float a dock, for instance. So quite quickly, as you move away from settled communities, the profile of pollution changes. But definitely when we're in settled areas, it's a lot of single-use plastic material.
Right. I think it's interesting to see that, in areas where more people are, that's a little bit more related to the things that we're putting in the ocean. Whereas when we see, when we get a little bit outside of those communities, it's a lot of things that are still our problem because we're buying the fish and we're buying the things that are using that, but it's a little less specific to an individual consumer.
Oh yeah, and I think what's really interesting, and I think lends a lot of the strength of our organization to this issue, is that we're able to sort of observe the gaps, right? I think a lot of us care about plastic pollution, and specifically single-use plastics, because we see it in our lives and we see it on the shorelines that we visit. But having been to these other places, these more remote places, quite quickly you see that is actually not the major type of impact of plastics. Right. It's more of the commercial material. And so, Surfrider is able to sort of share that information with people, decision makers, stakeholders, and really try to raise awareness around the fact that, there's a whole wide array of plastic material that we have to deal with if we're really going to reduce its impact in the marine environment.
Yeah, it's not just the plastic cups. It's a lot more than that.
For sure.
And I think, we're really fortunate to be surrounded by really beautiful coastlines and the ocean here on the island. And in some ways, I think that means we can see that problem of pollution on our coastlines a little more easily than people are who are maybe landlocked. You can go for a walk on the beach and literally see things out there, or go camping up the coast into those more remote areas and see that pollution. But it's not just a local problem. This is an issue everywhere. And I wonder, Steph, if you might be able to speak a bit to how plastic pollution is a global problem and some of those impacts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that you talk about some of those big items, because I think I had one of those aha moments when we went to visit Japan a number of years ago. I don't know if you are aware, Japan actually has sand dunes. And we went to this little town looking to find these sand dunes and to see what they were all about. So we hiked our way all the way up to the top and down to the bottom, and that's where we hit the shoreline of one of the water bodies whose name I can't remember. But the thing that really hit me was how much garbage was on this beach. It was a lot of the things that you said. It was, a lot of like big gas canisters. It was tires. It was gigantic containers. I can't remember if we found styrofoam. There were like industrial ropes, like big ropes. There was a baseball bat. And, when you looked at the items, you realized that the language that was written on it was not just Japanese. I saw Korean on it. I saw English on it. And I took some pictures while we were on the beach. And I remember coming back to the conservation organization I used to work with, and I went, what on earth is going on? Why would somebody drive over a sand dune with their giant tires and their giant barrels and dump them on this really random kind of isolated beach? And she said to me, you know what, that's actually not people dumping. That's actually stuff coming in from the currents. And I just remember having this major aha moment of, oh my goodness, it's not just about me and my individual actions. It's about when things go into the water moves. And where does the water move to? Right? And I think we also saw that during a lot of the tsunamis as well, where we had, big waves and big storms, and we saw the water move things from like Japan over to our coast, or a lot of things from our coast down south up into the North Island. And I had friends who I think went up to Haida Gwaii and helped with shoreline cleanups. So it's not just, we have to think about it, going back to what I was saying before. It's, again, not just a local issue, but it's what do our local actions, the impact of the local actions that we have in the context of the rest of our province, the rest of the world, and really thinking about what those individual actions are. And again, not just individual actions, but all of the choices that we make have a decision. So you were talking about aquaculture, right? Where does your food come from? Is it traveling really far? Is it local? Is it something that is sustainable? Is it something that's culturally appropriate? All of these things we have to be thinking about on a worldwide scale.
I think, the actions that we have here, everything that we do, the ocean doesn't just stop and then it's another ocean that's somewhere else. Everything's connected. So let's bring weddings and events into the conversation a little bit. We've talked about some of these plastics and pollution found in the ocean, and a lot of those things can happen or occur at weddings, like single-use plastic cups or other single-use items. So from your perspective, how can wedding couples and vendors kind of help prevent some of that waste from getting into the oceans and into waterways?
Mm-hmm. I really appreciated what you said, Steph, about realizing our place in things and how we are one part of the whole and how intricately connected we are. When it comes to helping keep things out of the oceans and waterways and single-use plastics, don't use them. We don't need them. We've all, at this point, I hope, have been educated enough to know that very tiny fraction of all the plastic that has been made has ever been recycled. Recycling isn't the answer, obviously. We all have probably seen the turtles with the straws in their nose, or the islands floating in the sea made of plastic where the birds land. Like, we've all seen it, we all know it by now. There is no need for it. And when we think about how things have shifted over the last couple decades, it isn't recycling anymore. The first R is reduce. And so when it comes to weddings and events, again, I would put to couples or vendors and to really consider scaling things back, reducing the need for it, getting it local, and having reusable items. Like, if you can't find it and you can't reuse it, you don't need it. When it comes to single-use plastics, when it comes to the health of our oceans, and ultimately us, if we eat the ocean, it comes back to us, sometimes directly. So I would just say there isn't a need for it. Continue to educate ourselves about what we can do, but really just, reducing our consumption, especially around our weddings or events. Keeping what matters. Again, I always come back to keeping the heart, keeping the intention of the event. Being the officiant and focusing on ceremonies. That's what I'm always going to be talking about. But when it comes to single-use items and keeping them out of the oceans and waterways, it's just don't stop using it.
I think we had a really good quote in our first season from Jen, who was a wedding photographer up in Tofino. She said, "Do you really want the legacy of your wedding to be the trash that you've left in the ocean?" No, I don't know of anyone who'd be like, this is what I want from this special day.
How many solo cups did I leave on the beach?
I haven't worked with those couples yet. So.
But it happens, and I think, even when we have these items and we think we're disposing of them correctly is a really challenging word to use for something like plastics. So we talked about beach cleanups with Surfrider, but your organization also works to prevent and mitigate things like cargo container spills. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what these spills are, how they happen, and what kind of problems those create when they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know we live in a highly globalized economy, and maritime transportation is like an integral part of making the system work, moving goods from point A to point B, and big part of our of that industry is to move them through cargo containers on ships. And unfortunately, there's always human error at play or environmental sort of weather-based issues that can compromise the safety of those vessels. And unfortunately, sometimes they lose containers. And we've seen it several times here locally on Vancouver Island, where those containers have split away and ended up either sinking or floating and sort of landing on a beach, where they break open and all the containers' contents sort of spill all over the place and require a cleanup. And so, it's definitely an issue that's become, I think, a little bit more elevated from our perspective. There's a lot of opportunity to increase the sort of capacity for responding to those circumstances. But it's not pretty when it happens. And it's it's definitely something that we'd like to see avoided as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, I imagine as climate change increases and we are seeing more of these unusual weather events that are becoming more and more usual, as well as shipping things globally more and more, it's just that's not a good combination.
No, it's not. And it's interesting how there's we were just talking about single-use plastics, and a lot of it was the sort of physical concern around, now I've got this waste to manage, right? But, to sort of bring it around full circle to your comments about climate change, I mean, we do have, arguably really quite advanced waste management here in Canada, especially in British Columbia. So we are able to move that away from the environment. Well, it's always in the environment, but essentially manage it in a way that's as environmentally responsible as possible. But what people, also can understand is that it took a lot of energy to make those materials in the first place that we only use once. Yeah. And then to manage it and process it at the end of its life also takes a lot of energy. Yeah. And that energy ends up impacting the environment and, through greenhouse gas emissions, which has impacts on the ocean environment and other, climate change outcomes. So yeah, it's all kind of connected. Yeah. So when we, zoom back into events and weddings and we think about, we want to avoid waste, but also, avoiding waste isn't just the practical concern about managing this material. It's also about all the secondary impacts that come through the manufacturing and through the processing end of life side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot more than just I have this plastic cup, I'm going to recycle it. It's, how was that created and then how was it shipped? Were some of those lost on the way there? And that's a lot of implications.
For sure.
So back to weddings. Well, we're already in weddings and events. When we're looking at these spills, when those do happen, Charlie, I'm wondering if we can talk about kind of how we prevent this on the wedding side of things. If we're looking at wanting to be consumers in a way that prevents this from happening, is it just as simple as kind of shopping locally? Is it always just we should just shop locally?
Yeah, well, shopping locally will be an answer that I will give to everything, but yeah, it's hard because we might not be able to stop the flow, and we talked about this earlier when we were talking about climate change and how everything is things are set up to run, and why fix something if it's not broken, but when it comes to the need to break things down when we are considering climate change and we need things to change, and so it is tough. But I was thinking about what you were just saying, Lucas, about the idea of plastic pollution and the idea that we're drowning in plastic, and the idea now that we know, if you're drowning in it, then turn off the tap, turn off the source of it. And so, yeah, it's going and holding those industries and corporations accountable that are creating these products in the first place. And so when it comes to weddings and events and couples and vendors that could be more mindful of that is, figuring out what is our responsibility in this? How can we participate in a way that isn't just reactive? And of course, going to beach cleanups is awesome, and being there, 100% being there. Is there a future that we can envision where there's no longer cargo ships? I live on Dallas Road. I live right down by the water off of Dallas Road. And I was there when it was a year or two ago with the spill, and seeing that happen and seeing the response to that. So we see the response, we see things, the good that's come of that, but how do we stop being reactionary to these things? How do we prevent us? I really don't know. I actually don't have an answer to this, except, the fact I think we need to figure out what our role and responsibility is in all of this, and do that at a minimum. And then, yes, like Lucas was saying, get involved, get at a local level, at a federal level, find out what these policies and regulations are. Do they need to be changed? What are the organizations that are already working on things like that and fighting for change, and maybe consider joining that fight. So
yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's the more you see and the more you become involved, the more you can recognize your part in that problem. I think it's easy to just sit back and be like, oh, there was a spill somewhere and someone had to clean it up. That sucks. But if you're going down there and helping with those beach cleanups, seeing items that you maybe would have bought, and thinking about, hey, I ordered something like this off of name redacted website that we all hate. You know, I did that a month ago, and seeing that same item being down there, it's that ripple effect is you might start to change the way that you're thinking about your buying habits as well.
Yes, but I also think you might start to change the way you think about how the producers of those materials are bringing goods into your life. You know, I think often we see a narrative play out where, you know, we should be taking responsibility, but there is also a huge, you know, I think focus on producers taking more responsibility and finding ways to really innovate, prevent pollution at the source, right? Because I think we can do a lot as individuals, but it kind of detracts from the onus being put on the producers, which in many ways they have the ability to really change the amount of waste that is created.
Totally.
So
I think we talk about this with wedding vendors and wedding couples a lot, is who's responsible? And the answer there, I think, I mean, everyone's responsible. But I think part of that is the businesses are going to create the things that people want to buy. They're not going to create things that people don't want to buy. And so the more that we can put, even if it's a little bit of pushback on those companies saying, I'm not going to buy this. Now, obviously that's a very privileged position to be in, to say, I'm not going to buy an item if it's not made this way. But continuing to push back on those organizations, because they're not doing it on their own. They're not doing it without that pushback. Hopefully governments will continue pushing, and but yeah, lots of pushing to do.
absolutely.
So, Steph, one of the things that I know you're really passionate about and that you talk about in your programs at the Maritime Museum is about being an ambassador for the lands and waters where we live. So I'm wondering, how can we be better ambassadors for our oceans? And have you seen any good examples, talking about companies doing bad things, have you seen any good examples of businesses or companies that are doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say that I've only been on Vancouver Island for about 13 months. One of the things that I have found challenging is that when I do bring my reusables, nobody blinks an eye and they're totally okay with it, but there's no conversation around that. So that's something that's been interesting for me, is that, if you were to ask me the top 10 places that I want to shop at for sustainability, I don't know if I would actually be able to do that, other than to say things like go to a zero waste store, go to a refillery. Can I bring out a prop to show now?
Absolutely. We love props.
Okay, this is a little bit of a strange one. I'm going to take off my shoes.
I love it.
This is the one company that I got permission to plug. So I met this individual on Instagram. Her company is called Owl and Bear Studio. She's now based I'm going to put my shoe back on. Is based in Sydney. And part of the reason why I really love her work is that she actually looks at the entire chain of where everything is coming from. So she talks about who her suppliers are, and she's willing to pay a little bit of extra money to get what she feels is more of an environmentally friendly option for the textiles that she has, for the products that she has, but also for the shipping that it comes in as well. So I know that there are products that are sample products that she has considered bringing into her inventory, but when she got them shipped, she was realizing that they were full of plastic, or maybe things that she was not okay with from an environmental perspective, and is really, really open and very transparent about the decisions that she makes and why she chooses certain things over others. So that is the one person that I will plug, but it has been a little bit of a challenge. And with working with kids, I think it's so funny when you ask kids who are under 16, I often say to them, how many of you can vote? And they all just look at me and they go, Steph, we're underage. Of course we can't vote. And I think that they're at the age where they're starting to spend money. They've got those allowances. And so we talk about the power of spending money and voting with your dollar, and thinking about where it is that your dollar is going. And sometimes you're right. You don't always have a choice. There are certain things and certain needs that you have. But if you have the ability, and maybe things like the price is comparable, but you could choose from product A to product B, there's a lot of opportunities with that as well. So I think really thinking about maybe digging and doing a little bit of research. In terms of a larger scale example, there was an organization that I know about who brings in t-shirts and stuffed animals, and apparently 15, 20 years ago, every single t-shirt was packaged in their own plastic bag, and then they were packaged again in plastic in groups of 10. And they went, well, why? I'm just going to take all the plastic off. Nobody wants to buy that in the plastic. So they actually went back to their manufacturer that I believe is in Asia and said, you know what, if we buy a certain amount of product, will you ship it to us so that it's not individually wrapped? And so apparently now the t-shirts come in bundles of 10. Same thing with stuffed animals. They said, you know, we buy a lot of stuffed animals from you. We know that your stuffed animals have nurdles, which are tiny little plastic pellets. If I bought 100, would you be willing to change your design? The answer was no. What if I bought like 1,000 or 10,000? Would you be willing to change your design? And so now these stuffed animals come without the nurdles, and they don't come with the plastic eyes, and they don't come with plastic tags. And so what they do is they ship them, and they're a hub. So they bring all of these items in, and then they sell them to smaller places, so that smaller places that wouldn't have that same purchasing power.
Right.
Yeah, so there's definitely some ideas there. I also have more props. I don't know if you want to see.
Sure,
more.
give us one more prop. Well, I love a good prop.
Little things. Let me see. What do I want to show you next? Sustainable things. I think when we think about wedding gifts too, I think that there are some very interesting ones that we can do. Okay, I'll bring out a personal one. So I messaged my friend yesterday and I said, "Can I have the wedding gift we gave you back?" And she said, "What?" I said, "It'll make sense. I'll explain it to you later." So one of the things that we did for their wedding gift was so this is a reusable bag that I made that has a water-resistant liner in it, so I know that she packs a lot of her lunches. And my partner actually does a lot of wood burning on the side.
Amazing.
So we actually made these coupons for an ice cream date.
That is so cute.
So I think that we can definitely support a lot of local initiatives, a lot of local vendors through the small scale, the large scale, but also just like having fun with it and being really creative as well.
Totally. I think that's something we think about, that, you know, the sustainable option has to be more boring or more expensive, but that's definitely not the case. I would love to get that wedding gift. That's an amazing wedding gift. I was going to ask you, Chris, on what we can learn with this and bring into the wedding industry, but those are already some really good
That's
options. Any other thoughts? Too, on the idea of things that we can do as wedding industry professionals, maybe to be better ambassadors for the ocean.
Well, actually, I'll probably. I was going to say maybe Lucas could speak to this more, but the first thing that came to mind was inquiring whether it would make sense as a vendor for your business to be like Green Business certified. And we have the Surfrider certification locally here, and what that would look like to partner with an agency or organization to keep you accountable, to keep you on track with how your business is claiming to be sustainable. And I think that would be a great place to start outside of what you as an individual does. And I think for couples, it's just always, we're so privileged to be living here. And I think part of that responsibility of being able to be guests and settlers on this land is to really just learn about what our role is being here and how we can take care of this. And I think we'll speak a little bit more to that, but learning about where our place is in the bigger picture and learning from those who were here before us, who are caretakers of this land, the Indigenous that have been here. I think those two places to start would be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to give a little plug here for BC Green Business. We chatted with Jarrett in one of our other episodes, and we're actually a Surfrider approved business. But it was really awesome because it's helpful, I think, even for small businesses like ours, to have an outside voice come in and do exactly what that company, I love the idea of them getting these products, and this is just what the product is. It has these things in it, and it's got these plastic elements. You don't really think this is just what we offer. This is where we buy it. But to have someone come in and help you look at those choices that you're making and be like, oh, you know what? This doesn't have to be status quo. Is there some way that you can question this or make this change from that kind of business to business supplier situation, which is really awesome.
It's super cool. And you talk about choice, and it's rapidly changing. I think if we were to like rewind like 10 years ago, I think it would take a lot of effort to, find those opportunities to avoid waste, to increase your sustainability. But now, there's a lot more opportunities, I think, to support, people in the industry. Like you mentioned, the BC Green Business certification. I mean, now you have professionals that can walk you through how to reduce the environmental impact of your operations. Yeah. And there's a lot of great other sort of vendors or companies out there that are providing reusable options. And so I think it will always take more effort than the norm, which is, kind of that single-use paradigm. But if you are motivated, there are fantastic new options available to you. You just got to look a little bit.
Totally. And I think sometimes it's more effort upfront and sometimes more cost upfront, but oftentimes cost savings in the long run. If you're buying something single use over and over again, and then you replace that with something that you can buy once and just use it, that's going to be more expensive to start. But ideally, over time, that's going to save you time and money, and you're not having to figure out the waste management at the end of it. And we talked about rewinding 10 years, and I know that Lucas, you and your wife had a super low waste wedding back in 2012, which is fantastic. That's a little while ago now. Actually, 10 years. I was going to say exactly, but it's 2023 now. Yeah. I know what year we're in. It's all fine. So I wanted to ask you about your own wedding and kind of what steps you went through and why it was important for you to have a lower waste wedding.
Yeah, I mean, for us at that time, I think it was just part of our own personal philosophy, wanting to avoid the waste. And, we just took it upon ourselves to explore, low waste solutions. It took a little bit more work then. I believe I went onto Craigslist and found somebody who had just a bunch of plates available to rent. And so we did that for all the sort of foodware. We had to have a washing station, which a lot of guests helped with at the end. Amazing. Or the next day, and people who had stayed over. So, it was like unconventional in many ways, right? But at the same time, it enabled people to sort of feel, I think, engaged with helping to prevent the pollution. And we had about 150 people at our wedding. And at the end of it, all said and done, we only had like one garbage bag kind of full.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it's actually a really cool story to share afterwards about, if you do put a little bit of energy in upfront, there's absolutely ways that you can, prevent pollution, which is really nice.
And I like, we talked to you about making events and weddings meaningful. Being able to involve your people in that, especially when it's something that you're passionate about, being able to share that passion. I think weddings are about sharing who you are as a couple with the people that you love. And if that's something that you're passionate about, how awesome to get them involved in that. And it's just, washing dishes isn't fun, but it's more fun if you're doing it with people that you love. Yeah. You've got, your grandma and your partner's cousin on the other side all in the dish pit.
Totally.
It's really awesome.
And another way that, I've recently sort of seen people change the way that they organize their weddings is, unbeknownst to me, I was at work one day and I saw a bunch of donations coming in all at the same time for quite large sums. I was like, what is going on here? And then I started reading the notes for the donation, and it started to all connect into this couple that got married. So instead of actually asking for gifts, they asked all their guests to donate to a charity, and they chose Surfrider. And so, all of a sudden we had probably around $4,000 worth of donations from many people in the wedding party. So, for them, they also added that element to find a way to support a charity that's doing good and sort of advocating for solutions to prevent pollution.
Yeah, amazing, because I feel like especially now, there may have been a time that, in history where many people didn't live together before they got married, but now a lot of people do. They're already cohabitating. You already have all the things you need, and so that idea of people bringing you gifts to start your life together is just not, you don't need 2 toasters. You just don't need, unless you're eating a lot of toast all at the same time, in which case I'd say use the oven. I'm digressing, but it's a nice way people want to do something to celebrate that and to show you how much you mean to them. So giving those donations is, that's really awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have one more question that I want to ask, and I haven't, this is a surprise one, so I'll see who wants to answer it. But I want to talk just briefly about seafood. I think, often at weddings, we encourage people to eat vegetarian, have vegetarian food at their weddings for a number of reasons, but often the tradition, people will have some sort of meat and some sort of fish. So if they are having fish, I wonder if you can tell me what the most sustainable way is to go about having fish at your wedding, how you can have that, or maybe your answer will just be, don't have fish. So I don't want to give that a crack.
I can go. I am not married, so I have not encountered this yet. I think that my philosophy around food is sort of the same regardless of what the food is. And I think a lot about purchasing locally, so that's one big one. And also thinking about the scale in which something has come. So that means that I'm somebody who is not a huge fan of mass scale farming. I'm not from an agricultural perspective, I think there's a lot of environmental impact in there, especially when it's around monocrops as well. I'm not a big fan of things like cattle farming at large scale. They do make they have a lot of climate impact through their farts. So I just wanted to use the word farts.
Absolutely. Today we've had farts and porta potties. I was talking about porta potties earlier, so it's great.
Yeah, and the same thing with farming. You were talking about aquaculture as well. Is that something that makes sense on a large scale? Is it culturally appropriate as well, which some would say isn't? So when I think about the food that I eat as sort of overall, regardless of whether or not it's seafood or not seafood, it's I think about where did it come from? Is it small scale? And to go that little extra step for seafood, what species is it that I'm eating? I could talk more about it, but there's some mislabeling around seafood that I find really problematic. So a lot of menus will have the word snapper on it, which is they sort of sneak in any generic white fish under the term snapper. We don't actually have a fish that is just called generic snapper. Okay. We have, a lot of them are rockfish species, and not all the rockfish behave exactly the same way. So, for example, if you are fishing something, you don't know how to identify it, you're pulling it out of, maybe you were fishing it from an area where it's their number one breeding ground or number one schooling area, and you pull out 80% of that population, you don't have a lot left. So where you're fishing, the species you're fishing, how you're labeling it, the scale in which it's taken in, I think are all things that I consider across the board with the things that I eat.
Amazing. Yeah.
I don't eat the sea. That is a great answer.
Yeah, I think for me, food is a very loaded topic. I think for a lot of people, people have dietary preferences. They also have environmental concerns. So it's a really tricky one to navigate. There are some certification programs out there for people, that adds a degree of assurance. But I think it comes back to your point about, keeping things local as much as possible. And then you're just using good discretion with the options that are available to as much as that's possible, because it changes from place to place, right?
Totally. We talk a lot in this series about asking questions, and that being a really an easy thing that you can do. So, asking your caterer, and not always just taking that at face value, but doing a bit of your own research as well. And then also considering, too, we talked about this earlier, not just the effects of eating that salmon or fish or whatever kind of seafood you're eating, but the byproducts of that, the fishing gear that's ending up washing up on the shore too, and considering that whole life cycle of the fish. There's a lot. Okay, so last question. I'm going to ask each of you briefly if you had one piece of advice to people watching this program, either a wedding vendor or a wedding couple getting married. What's one piece of advice you would give about celebrating in an ocean-safe way? Maybe we'll start with you, Steph.
I'm going to cheat because I had 3 prepared.
Amazing.
The first one is have fun with it. Have fun. Be creative. There's always more than one answer to every challenge or problem. And that goes for weddings, goes for events, it goes for anything that we encounter in our life. And the last one is to be okay to advocate for yourself. So you're going back to what you were saying about questions and not taking things for face value, but doing your own research, understanding what it is that you care about, and then holding people accountable to that, and being okay to say, hey, I'm really not okay with this, or I really would like this, and this is the reason why. So I would say always be your own best advocate.
Amazing. That's great advice.
That was cheating.
No, 2 is great. More advice is better than less advice. Amazing. Lucas?
I think for me, I just get really excited for the fact that people now have a lot of options available to them. So they put the effort in, but now there's a lot of choices available. So if it's about, reusing containers or reusing plateware, cutlery, all that is like totally available now. Other types of opportunities are there. So they can just put a little effort in and they're going to see, I think, great results.
Totally. I think, what you speaking about your wedding from 10 years ago and having to go on Craigslist to find someone who was renting out plates, there's tons of companies now you can rent. I mean, everything here has been rented. This whole backdrop, the table, that plant, every single item has been rented. It's pretty awesome.
Totally.
Charlie.
Yes. Okay. I'm always going to say for couples and vendors working with couples to really help put forth the intention and the heart of the day and what you want it to look like. So really thinking deeply and beyond just that one day and that one event. But I would say consider reducing overall. We've become, I would say, pros since COVID at having to scale back everything. So I don't think there needs to be this resurgence of getting back out there. We want to do better since COVID. And so just staying the course of maybe keeping things simple, maybe scaling things back, finding items that are reusable, finding obviously local things. And yeah, I would just, we spend more time probably thinking about I don't know, is wedding hashtag still a thing? What's my wedding hashtag? But we don't spend maybe as much time thinking about our heart and intention for the day that is really going to set us up for the rest of our lives. So on a heart level and a romantic level, I would really want to give my couples and the vendors working with couples that advice.
Amazing. Well, I think that's the perfect place to leave it. Thank you all so much for coming and chatting about oceans today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I think that went swimmingly.
Oh! Good one. I'm not going to lie, I thought about that this morning.